So when the music starts, the lights...
Yeah, so that, but you can put it on the audience so that they enter. I'm organizing a big event at the biggest theater in this part of Europe. And we are marking the 4th anniversary of Julian Assange's political asylum in Ecuador. So it's happening at the same day today in Berlin, Brussels, Belgrade, Bucharest, Paris, Naples, Madrid, Sarajevo. These are all the venues, all our people. I think this case is not just about Julian Assange, it's about transparency, it's about democracy in Europe.
Are you nervous about speaking on stage? How does this fit in with your normal life?
This is normal life.
Those who want to change the world, to fight injustices, are today in a very strange situation.
But don't philosophers just sit in a room and write books?
Yeah, some of them.
Tell me what you do.
Sometimes I write books.
But also...
But I also do this, I also go to refugee camps.
So do you think you're a new kind of philosopher?
I don't have time to think about myself anymore. I'm also stressed. But it's not good. It will be me as speaker and Yanis Varoufakis as speaker. Where do we get in? From this side we get in.
So as you know, we are going to listen and to have a conversation with two major intellectual European figures.
Why am I here?
So please welcome them both on stage. Srecko Horvat and Yanis Varoufakis.
What I learned from Julian Assange is that you have to be consistent. Maybe sometimes you have this temptation to think that we are not important, that the powers are smiling at us and laughing when we occupy a square, that they are laughing when we are in a public space. But hello, we have 2,000 people here tonight, in 8 cities at the same time, hundreds of thousands watching the live stream, and I think the most... Today you cannot just sit in a room and write books. Even if you want to write about the refugee crisis, you cannot do it if you didn't speak to a refugee, for instance. Or if you are writing about the crisis of Europe or solutions for Europe, I think you cannot do it if you don't speak with the people. I think we don't have time only to sit in a room and write about it. We need to act because this continent is collapsing. The financial crash of 2008 started in America's housing market, but devastated Europe as it lurched from sovereign debt crisis to economic stagnation. Unemployment of 25% in some countries led to social unrest, and the continent suffered the worst terrorist attacks in years. And that was before over 1 million refugees decided to walk the Balkan route into Europe. Often all this is discussed as forces of nature beyond our control. But as a philosopher, I look for the root causes. What if the economic collapse, refugees and terrorism are actually all caused by something more fundamental? I'm going on a journey across Europe in search of what connects the crises tearing our continent apart. Thessaloniki, northern Greece. If you just visit its central square, you'd never guess this small, charming city is at the epicenter of Europe's problems. In 2015, refugees fleeing war and poverty walked into Europe through the nearby village of Idomeni. Germany said they would accept Syrians, but after more than 1 million people came, Europe panicked and sealed the border, trapping those who continued to come in hope. Greece finally cleared the Idomeni camp in May 2015, citing sanitation and safety. But that's not the whole story. We are heading towards a new refugee camp where the refugees from Idomeni were moved, and we are going to meet Mustafa there. Mustafa is from Aleppo and reached Idomeni just as the border was closed. He spent 3 months there hoping and trying to cross before the authorities cleared the camp. And would you say are the conditions better here than in Idomeni? Like what was better there and what is better here?
Yeah, actually, here is better. It's a closed place. It protects you from the sun, from raining, from the wind. And for the tent, here is big. But nobody knows how long we're going to stay. They give no information about that. Like, you ask how long we're going to stay, how long it takes for the pre-registration. They said nobody knows.
Mustafa is taking us back to Idomeni to explain why the camp was cleared. And this is something I wasn't expecting. A motorway service station transformed by those refusing the government camps. The services allowed them to stay, but at the same time doing good business charging them for showers.
Now it's 100% change. The place, it used to be full of tents.
And now no one.
Now only me.
Can you show us a bit how it looked like at the tracks?
Yeah.
So refugees had tents on all this place here, right?
Yeah, this one, even here, it's like full of tents.
These tracks are the most important route from Greece seaports, a crucial way for local companies and multinationals to get their goods into the heart of Europe. Ah, there is a train coming.
Yeah.
So when the tents were here at this place, there were no trains coming, right?
Yeah, it's become like for 2 months, there is no trainway. They try many times to bring the train, ask people to open it, and nobody open it.
Do you think the refugees represented a problem for the free moving of goods and products?
There is a ministry who come here, and he said that they should open the railway. Like, they tries with many ways. We told them that your economics are not more important than our children. We will open it when you open the border.
So you were blocking the trains deliberately. You knew that if you were blocking the way, that Europe and the Greek state, they will start to react.
Yeah.
The Greek train company OSC told us they couldn't move goods for 75 days, costing them $2.5 million in lost shipping fees. I think Idomeni is the best metaphor for what is happening in Europe today, in the sense that it shows that people, refugees who were fleeing from war, and from war zones such as Syria, but also Afghanistan and Iraq, became a problem. Why? Because we are at a train track and they were blocking the train track. So it became a problem for the corporations, for also other countries, not only Greece, because this way was blocked. So on the one hand, what you can see is that refugees don't have the right to move freely. On the other hand, goods can move freely as far and as much as they want. But Greece is subject to forces beyond its control. The global financial crash revealed that Greece had taken out a mountain of loans from European banks. At the urging of European leaders, Europe's financial institutions gave Greece the biggest loan in history. And most of that money flowed straight back to the mainly French and German banks who had encouraged them to borrow. But the loan conditions required extreme austerity, state spending cuts so severe that the economy shrunk by a quarter. Unemployment reached 27%, prompting a huge rise in suicide. Another condition was mass privatization of Greek assets, including the strategically important port of Piraeus. It is one of the most important ports in the Mediterranean, and recently the Greek government has sold 67% of the shares to a Chinese company called COSCO. The docks are quiet today, The sell-off has prompted a battle with the unions. They say the troika of the International Monetary Fund, the European Central Bank and the European Commission are experimenting with a new kind of privatization. You're at strike already for how many days?
20 days today. We're the 20th day of strike.
So where are we going now?
We are going to a trade unionist meeting. It's an international trade unionist meeting. They're very much interested in the privatization model that is used in these two ports, which is highly unusual, since they privatize even the Port Authority, or at least serious features of the Port Authority.
And we are now at the Port Authority. This is the building of the Port Authority.
Yes, now we are in the Piraeus Port Authority headquarters, and it will be privatized. The day after, this building will be given to COSCO.
Because COSCO doesn't recognize unions, the dockers fear they will go from being skilled employees with secure jobs to temporary workers with no rights. Can you explain us what is the difference between the working conditions is the part of Piraeus which is still owned by the Greek state and at the part which is already owned by COSCO?
They are using a complex system of subcontractors. So there is no direct employment by COSCO. They have a precarious employment. That means they work 10, 12, 15 days a month. So there is no stable job for them. There is no certain schemes of training, professional training. So that's why there are frequent accidents in this terminal.
So will this maybe also this model will be of subcontracting expanded to other ports in Europe?
The last 6 years, Greece is an experiment for Troika and neoliberal policies. What they are testing here, they try to export it in other countries in the European Union.
What we have seen in Port Piraeus is that the biggest historical achievements of the European project, such as collective bargaining, such as trade union organizing, minimal wages, all of this is actually disintegrating. Many blame the Chinese company COSCO, but I'm meeting former Greek finance minister Yannis Varoufakis, who has astonishing inside information about Europe's part in the deal. No, it seems this is not working.
Mr. Horvat.
Yeah,
It's good to see you.
Amongst the first things I did in the ministry, day one, day two, was to embark upon a kind of silent negotiation with the Chinese authorities and with the COSCO CEO. And we agreed to collective bargaining and to allowing trade unions to represent workers throughout the port, if they were given the rest of the port. Secondly, they agreed on a spectacular investment program of anything between 250 and 300 million euros within 18 months. That would have been a fantastic injection of capital, of activity, of jobs in the port of Piraeus. And finally, most importantly, they were prepared, the Chinese government, to contribute, to purchase a bond, a new bond that we would issue as a Ministry of Finance up to 10 billion. So effectively, they would help us return to the markets and create, effectively signal to the rest of the world that Greece is back. Now, I thought that that was a very good deal. And guess what happened? There was a telephone call from Berlin to Beijing saying, keep off Greece while we're negotiating with them. And all deals were off because, of course, China is not going to jeopardize its relationship with the heart of Europe in order to seal a deal with us.
Currently, the Greek government is selling 67% of the port of Piraeus. And under your deal, it was supposed to be 51, right?
Yes. All those things that we had negotiated, the Troika made sure that we're not part of the deal. They just did not want any European peripheral country to begin to imagine that if they voted people like us in, they would get a better deal even for one person.
Although hugely important for Greece, Piraeus is only a tiny part of the 35-year program of privatization across Europe. Sectors like railways, energy, post, banking, and airlines were all part of the $1 trillion of public assets privatized since 1980. It was the United Kingdom under Margaret Thatcher that led the charge for privatization in Europe. David Hall has been studying the impact of it for over 30 years. Privatization supposedly reduces prices, improves services, and so on. What has your experience and your studies shown?
It doesn't reduce prices, and it usually doesn't improve services. And in many cases, it makes services worse. That's the basis on which privatization was always sold, but immediately people have experience of privatization. Almost the first thing that happens is that prices go up. Prices go up because the private companies that have taken over are in the business of restructuring it to generate returns that the public company didn't get.
Which might explain why it's usually met with popular resistance. But it's almost always forced through. When Italians voted in a referendum to end laws promoting water privatization, the government tried to reintroduce them and left the water utilities in private hands. Why do you think that most of the governments in Europe, but also in Latin America and the States, still stick to this kind of economic model?
Privatizations are seen as an easy way of getting large amounts of money into government, so you can use it either to reduce debt or to reduce taxes. And that's how Thatcher used it, and that's how again and again governments do it. And that's how, for example, countries like Greece are being instructed to use it by the IMF. This is the core purpose of privatization in a Greek context, is to generate revenue to reduce the debt.
And once something is in private hands, it is at risk of takeover by larger, often foreign companies. I'm in Romania, where they recently protested against water and health privatization. But nothing seems to get them as worked up as their forests. Since being handed back to private owners, they've been heavily exploited by international investment firms and European wood processing companies. On the border with Transylvania is one of the forests that has been decimated. It's irreplaceable, according to the lawyer representing forest owners.
Romania have the last intact forest landscape, where the man has not intervened. These forests are today they are not protected.
How far away is it actually?
1 hour, or depend of the road, 1 hour and a half.
The illegal clear-cutting mainly happens in remote places, high up in the mountains. Romania was a colony of the Austro-Hungarian Empire, and now, as the second poorest country in the European Union, is again on the periphery of a giant. Their relative poverty means cutting gangs can exploit forests the country can't afford to protect.
You see it? Where there's no forest? You see it? Here we can see the...
Wow, so this is it finally, huh?
Yeah. From here we don't see it. It's bigger than this.
What we can see here is completely illegal, right?
Usually you are not allowed to cut more than 3 hectares of forest, clear cut.
And how big is this approximately?
150, 200 hectares of forest, but it's entirely gone. And we hear it now, they are still cutting it. They cut it every day.
Since when did this start, and what is the scale of this clear cutting in Romania?
The big ones, beginning after 2002, 2003, that was the moment when the Srecko company opened their first factory in Sebeș, in Alba County.
The Austrian company Holstein Schweighofer are now Romania's largest wood processor. They don't cut the woods themselves. but they're able to offer a relative fortune to those who will.
Mostly, these clear cuts are done by the Romanian peoples. The gang who cut this forest forged the documents, and when they reached the Schweihofer factory, they had some documents to show them. They didn't respect any law or any regulation.
But at the factory, some don't even need forged documents. The Environmental Investigation Agency posed as a cutting gang willing to ignore the law, something that didn't present a problem for Schweighofer.
A little bit concerns me is the rigidity of the volume that we have to produce every year.
It's not a problem of rigidity from our side, because you decide what you want to sell.
We asked Schweighofer for an interview, but they declined. So we turned to Hans, a green activist who has been sued by Schweighofer.
It's huge, huh?
Wow.
One of their employees, a manager, has admitted that if they run at full capacity, there's no place for other processors on the market.
Can you tell us, once they end up in this factory, where do they go?
This sawmill is actually slicing up the logs. They make planks out of it, and then they export it worldwide. Be it China, be it Japan, the Arab countries, even USA. It's a world market. The main problem is the fact that there's not much left for us. The added value happens somewhere else. The jobs happen, so to say, somewhere else.
All of this exploitation of nature is happening in Romania, but nothing stays here. It actually goes to other countries, right?
Yeah, you stay in this vicious circle, okay, of selling more and more resources at the price that is being created or fixed somewhere else outside of your country. And yeah, you stay in a dependency of those ones who buy your resources. And you destroy your nature and you destroy the livelihood.
This makes me wonder whether we can speak about a new kind of relationship which is very similar to the relationship which we had during the Austro-Hungarian monarchy. You have the empire, you have Western Europe, Austrian companies, German companies, French companies who are cutting forests all around Romania and the periphery of the European Union, and then they are importing them back to Europe. And the empire is using the natural resources, not only forests, but healthcare system, education, water, and they are extracting the value in order to serve the center. So could we say that Europe is actually colonizing itself? In part 1, we saw how the richest countries of Europe are extracting the resources of smaller peripheral countries like Greece and Romania in what could be described as a colonial way.
It's quite interesting to look back at the first globalization, the 1890s, the late 19th century, where you got a very similar picture of British, French, German companies investing around the world in sometimes the same kind of sectors, electricity, water, rail, just as they're starting up.
Just as then, the companies buying up these sectors have close links to the state, like energy giants EDF, owned by the French government, and Vattenfall, owned by Sweden. But it's not limited to just European companies and governments. Europe is also facilitating a colonization by larger forces. Sociologist Saskia Sassen says finance, the abstract idea of making money from money, is the real power in the world today.
One way in which I would put it is that we're really dealing with a period that is dominated by a logic of extraction. That is not the language they use. It sounds much better if you say privatization and deregulation. That just sounds like such a intelligent and sober way to go about it. When you say finance, Google, and all kinds of other sectors are extractive sectors, that doesn't feel so good. That feels like something is getting taken out. The financial system, it might as well be mining. It has to go into other sectors and extract. What makes it particularly dangerous, unlike, say, more traditional forms of investment and corporate, is that it can extract, not just from the very rich, but from anything, including very modest.
Even those who once supported the free market are worried. In a century of the old Austro-Hungarian Empire, former politician Gaspar Tamás campaigned for Hungary's transition from communism to the free market. But he was horrified when that led to millions losing their jobs. He puts this recent trend into historical context.
So this is the same colonialism without responsibility, without the political project, without the Royal Navy, without the British Raj, without introducing this and that. This is just sheer economic and political force being applied without any kind of responsibility and any kind of idea about economic future, whatever, to the weaker countries.
So basically claiming this is even worse than colonialism, because colonialism...
In many ways it was. This is a politics of total irresponsibility. It's treating everything and everybody in the same manner, maximizing profits and neglecting strategy. And, this is not the old, Krupp company or the old General Motors or the old Standard Oil that had some sort of policy, that had some sort of construction that has been, threshed out to the political authorities and so on and so forth. These companies today didn't have any policy, not even a wrong one, not even an evil one. They just want the money.
Much of that money flows through the city of London, Europe's biggest financial center. But how long London will retain that position is unknown since Britain voted in a referendum to leave the EU in June 2016. This utterly stunned the British and European establishment, who blamed it on the economic losers, who they say are also xenophobic. But Britain was also the pioneer of privatization in Europe, especially in places like Port Talbot in Wales. The last surviving blast furnace of Britain's once mighty steel industry. This facility was sold off in the 80s and is now owned by the Indian giant Tata, who periodically threatened to close it. So I wonder, is it really immigration or economics behind Brexit? Nice to meet you from Al Jazeera.
Immigration, it's not just a case of they're coming over and taking our jobs. A lot of jobs that they've taken are because people don't want to do them anymore. Yeah. Farmers will tell you that. Farmers cannot get people to go into a field and pick potatoes or pick sprouts or whatever it might be. Just because we come out of Europe doesn't mean to say it will solve the problem. Because if you still can't get people to pick the sprouts or to pick the fruit, then you're going to let people in to do it.
What is the importance and significance of the steel factory? And how it all could change if it closes down, what would be the effects on ordinary citizens or families and so on.
Without Port Talbot, it puts to risk all the other downstream suppliers that we've got. We've got Trostra, which is 50 miles down the road, that does every single Heinz tin in this country, originates from Port Talbot and is then tinned in Trostra.
The effect in the economy of the whole of South Wales would be severe if anything happened here.
The knock-on effect would be incredible. Your corner shops, hairdressers, petrol stations, self-employed people, your builders, your carpenters, all these people rely on the steelworks because the people working here feed them as well.
The three of you voted to remain on the referendum. How? You didn't vote?
I'll be honest, I'm very disillusioned with the parliamentary processes that go on. It got to a stage where they both sides just turned me off, completely off.
I voted to go out. but we've been dictated to by a bigger union, and I think it's not quite right. So that's where I voted, and for a change. As Marcus said, there are a lot of deprived areas around here, and people had nothing to lose.
So it isn't immigration they're angry about, but the colonial-style extraction Britain has practiced on itself for 35 years. The effects of which are obvious in Mark's hometown of Tredegar, which lost its steel mill in 2013. And all of this is now closed permanently or not?
That is closed permanently,
This
yeah,
one?
as you can see there.
What was it before?
It was, well, it's been a variety of things. It's been a laundrette, it's been a hairdressers.
And how is this connected with the steelworks?
Because businesses set up, they may last a year, 2 years. People can't afford to buy the products or use the services, and they close down. Now if you look around, you'll see it's like takeaways, hairdressers.
Yeah. This is the kind of place supposedly full of hatred for immigrants, but it seems that resentment of foreigners has little to do with their anger at the EU. In the pub, I find out what the issue really is. Prepare for an economics lesson, Welsh style.
In the sort of neoliberal economic model, full employment is not of vital importance. It's failed communities like this, where full employment and in industry were so important, and the result is poverty, crime, and an increase in inequality.
But neoliberalism has caused one major issue, which is you've got companies who are bigger than countries. Yes. So we've got a choice. We're at that crossroads. Do you accept that we're going down a road of this neoliberalism of global corporations, which then start to rule the world, or are we going to start going, well, actually, no, that can't be allowed to happen. What we've got to get back to is assets that are British, assets that are French, assets that are German, are controlled by those states. You know, the biggest freight rail company in this country is German. All our water companies, all our electrical companies are all foreign. Surely that can't be right.
Do you think after Brexit, UK won't be open to the dangers of globalization, neoliberalism and so on? Or big companies will still be here in UK and have the opportunity for exploitation, tax evasion?
Saying whether we're in or whether we're out doesn't really make a big difference, because they control it whatever.
How can this colonial process of dispossession be taking place on such a massive scale, without becoming headline news? Well, this 21st century colonialism doesn't ride into town waving a national flag. It just seems to happen. But it's actually the result of institutions and rules designed to be hidden. I'm going to try and unravel this beginning at the port of Calais. We are going to the so-called jungle, which is a refugee camp in Calais. The jungle is home to those trying to cross the 20 miles of sea between here and Britain. I'm visiting between the French government's regular attempts to clear it at a time when it's still growing. You can still see 3,000 people here who are in a kind of limbo. People from Syria, Afghanistan, Africa, Iraq, and all these countries from war zones. On the other hand, everything is being done to preserve the free floating of goods. The Eurotunnel connects Britain to Europe and covers over $100 billion of trade a year. John Keefe is the Director of Public Affairs.
So what the Channel Tunnel carries is all the high value, the perishable, the just-in-time components for manufacturing, the express deliveries, the internet retail. So companies can actually manage their stock in a constantly moving process. It saves them from having warehousing, saves them enormous costs, and it means that they can have these integrated businesses that operate across the whole of Europe.
The whole area of 35 kilometers is like this?
Yeah. Previously we had sort of boundary fences, the sort of thing that you would see around any factory or any industrial site. Then people started to try and break down the fences. So the answer was increase the quality of the fences. These are the NATO standard high security fences. They're very difficult to cut, they're very difficult to climb. So we now have a very, very sophisticated fencing and surveillance operation here. And since October last year, we've had absolutely no disruption from the migrant crisis.
What about the refugees who came from Syria, from Idomeni, from Greece, and who are actually also trying just to find a better life?
The refugee problem is something which is a geopolitical issue. So we're a company, we're a business that operates between Folkestone and Calais. We don't have a role, a major role in solving the refugee crisis. That's for governments, international institutions to manage. We have a role, a responsibility to our customers, to our shareholders, to our own staff, and to anybody who's on our site.
Eurotunnel security is now a seamless operation involving French and UK forces. A relationship established only after the company sued the governments in a special corporate court.
There were questions as to exactly where that responsibility cut in and how much responsibility Eurotunnel shared. And so there was a case in the International Court for Arbitration in the early 2000s, and the precedent was set there quite clearly that the states have that responsibility.
Obviously, from the perspective of the company, Eurotunnel, it makes sense to ask the cost to be covered from the state. Because in the first place, the state was responsible for the refugee crisis. But it's very interesting to see what is precisely the mechanism which is being used here in order to get the costs being covered by the state. The Court of Arbitration ordered Britain and France to pay Eurotunnel $25 million for the cost of securing against migrants in the late 90s. This is highly controversial, so I'm going to the heart of the EU, Brussels, to talk to someone who knows how the secret processes work. That court is part of the investor-state dispute settlement mechanism, known as the ISDS, which allows companies to sue states when their profits are threatened.
The whole point about the investor-state dispute mechanism is that it runs outside the court system. It's about a special sort of law for big corporations.
ISDS is part of the TTIP, right?
ISDS is part of the TTIP.
So for most of the ordinary people, if you mention something such as TTIP, they will not understand what it is about.
Okay, well, TTIP is the Transatlantic Trade and Investment Partnership, and it's a major trade deal on the table being discussed now between the European Union and the United States. It has all sorts of implications, you know, from the food you eat, the medicines you take, the vehicles that you drive, the energy that you have, animal welfare, whether you want to keep genetically modified organisms out of your crops, you know, if the worst comes to the worst, and some of the big corporations get what they want, this really could be a potential real rollback of a lot of the very valuable legislation that a lot of people have fought over the years to get in the European Union.
Okay, we follow you.
Right, do the staircase.
Supporters, on the other hand, say that harmonization of regulations will grow the European economy by tens of billions of dollars a year. So I thought it would be sensible to see the document, and Jean agreed to take me to the reading room for members of the European Parliament.
It's not open to the public in any sort of way. You only get access to the documents if the institution whose documents they are gives you permission.
Oh, my God.
So if the United States says we're not willing to let you see our documents, you don't get to see them.
It's taken a massive European-wide grassroots campaign for MEPs to be allowed to see the text of the TTIP agreement. And even now, it was proving hard to find.
That's the number that I was given.
Hello. Do you maybe know where is the TTIP room, reading room?
Yeah, because what we were told was 4C17, but obviously that's not right.
4C17, no.
No. Okay. Okay. Apparently I only got half the instructions. It's opposite 4C17.
Okay, let's try again.
Yeah, try again.
Go to the room of the dynasty.
No, it's not that one then.
Oh, but it's opening.
In that case, then it's not the right one.
Hello. Do you maybe know, is this the... Sorry? No. He says we can't film here. Just tell us we will not film anymore. Is this the TTIP room? TTIP room? No? He confirms it is the room. The huge trade agreement is behind an unfindable, unmarked door with a security keypad. Okay. Thanks.
As a Minister of Finance of Greece, of one of the member states that was affected by these negotiations, I had to sign a non-disclosure agreement promising that I would not reveal to my constituents, to my voters, that which I read, if I was allowed to have a look at those negotiating documents. This is preposterous. This is the annulment of the democratic process. Representatives in a representative democracy keeping the demos whom they represent in complete darkness about what they are saying on their behalf.
So why all the secrecy? WikiLeaks has exposed the TTIP and its siblings, the Trans-Pacific Partnership and TISA, a similar deal covering services. So we are going to rescue Julian Assange. At the Ecuadorian embassy in London, he explains why we only know about these agreements from leaks.
These big T3 agreements, TISA, TTIP and TPP, are kept secret because otherwise they'll induce democratic opposition in the population and they won't be possible to negotiate to conclusion. It's pretty obvious.
What do they tell us about the new global order and what are the effects on democracy?
These are the most significant plan to reorder the legal and economic structure of the West and friends at least since the construction of Europe. The nature of the agreements is a construction of a new legal and economic bloc, an ultra-neoliberal system which will cement ultra-neoliberalism within Europe and a wide range of other countries in treaty form, and treaties are very, very hard to change because you need agreement of all the countries participating in the treaty to change it. So it is the end of any other political project. Because only by violating the rule of law, by tearing up these treaties that you've agreed to, that in fact you can proceed in a different political direction.
Do you think this process could be described as colonialism, as a new way of colonialism?
Yes, it's a new multinational colonialism behind these agreements.
These trade agreements reveal hidden mechanisms through which Europe is, on the one hand, colonized by multinational companies and financial institutions, and on the other hand, colonizing itself. However, these very same forces are behind a more traditional style of colonization, which is not through trade agreements, but through bombs and wars. The US, British and French airstrikes against President Gaddafi in Libya in 2011 swept away a regime that was controlling migrant flows from Africa and released huge amounts of weapons into an already unstable region. Leaked emails suggest the real reasons for France's involvement were less than humanitarian.
Gaddafi had accumulated more than 143 tons of gold and was planning to use this to introduce an African dinar as an alternative currency to the franc in Francophone Africa. So this was a threat to French colonialist desires within the Francophone countries.
This reveals precisely how the refugees are linked to Europe's economic crisis. Far from being some kind of a natural disaster, a storm or a flood, it is Europe's colonial behavior abroad that forces them to make their dangerous journeys. Hungarian philosopher Agnes Heller has lived through a lot of European history, including losing her father in Auschwitz. She says the refugees challenge Europe's core idea of itself.
In the 18th century, already in the first constitution of France, two rights became lex lata, were in the constitution. The right of man, droit de l'homme, and the right of the citizen, droit de citoyen. The problem is that nowadays the two are in a conflict situation in Europe. That is, droit de man, that there's a human right, would basically oblige us to take all the refugees because they are indeed men like us. They are like us, they are born with reason and conscience and the equal right to liberty and to freedom and to all kinds of freedoms and to life, just like us. So we have to let them in. On the other hand, we invented also the right of citizens. In a country, in a state, citizens should decide who can enter the territory or not. This is the right of the citizen. The first time in our history, short history, 200 years history, it occurred that the right of man and the right of citizen are colliding with each other. Of course, a good government can persuade the citizen to give priority to human rights. A bad government like us persuades the citizen not to do it at all. Forget about human rights generally.
So maybe the danger they pose is not that 1 or even 2 million people could overwhelm a continent of over 500 million, but because admitting we should provide for these fellow humans would reveal how Europe's own citizens have been stripped of their resources and democracy by this financial colonization. In episode 2, we look at how the anger and frustration this generates is manifesting itself politically on both sides of the spectrum, and search out some hope for Europe's future.
We don't want the state to involve because this is a movement of people.
Den Volksentscheid gewonnen, 450.000 Leute, die Ja